Welcome to Portland Press Herald Audio. Today we have our Business Breakfast Forum, Office Park Portland, a discussion of the urbanizing impact of new office construction, held October 17, 2018 at the Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. The panel includes Drew Anderson, attorney partner at Murray, Plum & Murray, Sam Legate, broker at NAI Dunham, Nate Stevens, broker at CBRE, the Bolus Company, Jennifer Small, a broker at Malone Commercial Brokers. The moderator is Portland Press Herald business reporter J. Craig Anderson.
Well, I am Craig Anderson, business reporter at the Portland Press Herald. I've covered commercial real estate for many years in a variety of markets. I actually moved here 5 years ago from Phoenix, and in Phoenix, there was, even though we had gone through a big real estate boom and bust, there was by 2012 or so, there was already more commercial real estate construction going on. And when I moved here, I thought it was interesting that the market was so tight for office space, certainly Class A downtown, and yet there was nothing being built. And boy, that has definitely changed. The last count I looked, there was at least 10 office projects at some stage of planning or construction on the peninsula. So the market is really starting to move, and we've got a great panel of experts here to talk to us about what that means for commercial building owners, tenants, and business owners and residents in the area. So I'll just kind of go down the line here with our panelists. First of all, we have Drew Anderson from Murray, Plum & Murray. Drew's an attorney. He's a partner and the managing director of the firm, and he specializes in a variety of areas of real estate, including the purchase, sale, and development of commercial and industrial buildings and multifamily apartment buildings, leasing transactions. He also represents lenders and borrowers in loan transactions, and he assists developers with residential and office condominiums. Next, we have Sam Leggett. He's a broker at NAI, the Dunham Group, and he also deals with a variety of types of real estate. He has his hands in a lot of different things. He's on the membership and marketing committee for Merida. He's co-chair of the Develop Me committee, and he also is on the Westbrook Economic Vitality Committee and the board of directors for Habitat for Humanity of Greater Portland. We have, next to Sam, we have Jennifer Small. She's an associate broker with Malone Commercial Brokers. Jen works in all sectors of commercial real estate, including development, redevelopment, build-to-suit, land, office, medical, retail, and industrial. So she's got a wide range of experience in commercial real estate. And then down at the end, we have Nate Stevens, who's an associate broker at CBRE, the Bolus Company. Nate works in all areas of commercial real estate as well, including office, retail, industrial, and investment properties, all across central and southern Maine. So we have a wide range of experience here, and I guess we'll just kind of jump right into it. First of all, maybe we'll just kind of go down the line, and I'll just ask each of you for your take on what's going on with the office market in downtown Portland. Why now? Why are we seeing so much construction, and where do you think things are headed? So, Drew, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, things are hot, obviously. A lot going on in downtown and the peninsula with buildings. That's driven by the need, obviously. I think it's also driven by the fact that companies like WEX and Vets First Choice are looking for places in downtown as a recruitment tool. I think people want to be hiring, folks who want to be hired want to be in downtown where they live or work down here. It's very important to them. And so I think that's a big reason for some of these companies to come downtown when they have options outside the peninsula much cheaper. I think where we're headed is problems with parking and traffic, and I think we need to talk about that here, and we will get into that a little bit. So,
Sam, go ahead.
Yeah. Like Drew said, I think there's a need for the construction, and that's why we're seeing it. Vacancy has come down pretty steadily, and so we've had some companies willing to go out there and build a new building because, quite frankly, they need it.
Yeah. Jen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think the Class A market's very, very solid right now, but I think we are seeing some softening in the Class B market. There's a significant amount of vacancy in that 2,000 to 3,500 square foot range on the peninsula. With that said, our Class A market is pretty full, with vacancy being at pretty much all-time lows. So parking is obviously becoming a major issue. There's a lot of vacancy in the suburban market, which we might see given prices rising and new construction costs for tenants being fairly high. We may see some of these tenants taking a hard look on the suburban market as well.
Great. And Nate, what do you say?
Sure. Downtown, I think we kind of have a tale of two markets, and that's been the storyline for the last couple of years with regards to Class A versus Class B. Like the other panelists said, Class A Very, very tight market. Dropping vacancy rate last year was probably 3%. Quick study this morning, we're probably looking at around 1% this year. And so that's where you're starting to see some of that new construction start. But at the same time, I think there isn't a huge demand for Class A. You look at a couple of the newer projects, 16 Middle Street opened its doors about a year ago, and it's just about to get fully leased. Widgery Wharf, which is under construction right now, still has 2 floors available. But at the same time, I think I looked this morning as well in the Class A market, and I think that's the most interesting part of Greater Portland, and there were only 3 Class A buildings in downtown Portland that had space available, and no suites over 5,000 square feet. So I think that's a huge storyline moving forward, obviously why we're seeing new construction. Class B market, on the other hand, really not a lot happening. I think that has a lot to do with 3 large mostly vacant buildings on Congress Street. And until, I think we'll talk about one of those this morning, but until really anything happens with those, I'm not really seeing any movement in Class B. And but at the same time, there aren't large spaces available. Even over 10,000 square feet in Class A downtown, Class B downtown, or Class A right now at the moment, if you're looking for over 10,000, there aren't a whole lot of options.
With all this construction that's going on, I think the buildings we have written certainly the most about are the ones that have sort of a dedicated tenant like Flex and the Vet's First Choice. How much of what's going in is multi-tenant, and is that going to add a significant amount of space, of available space in the Class A market? Who would like to talk about that?
Kind of build on that point a little bit, Craig, we had a tenant that we were working with that we actually structured a deal where they are absorbing space in a Class A building over the next 2 years. So with that said, new construction was certainly an option for these folks, but it was certainly one that was probably out of their price range. So what they did is kind of came back and said, okay, we don't need all our space now, we can grow into this over a period of time. And we were able to structure a deal with them where they, kind of grew into existing inventory versus building a new building, because new construction kind of priced them out of the market. So we're seeing kind of creative stuff like that go on, because new construction, there's only so many companies that can afford, $30 triple net rents, and Wex and Vet's First Choice are amongst those. But some of the smaller companies that don't have that overhead, don't have that capital, aren't able to, have that overhead or want that overhead.
And is that how things are getting built? I mean, are developers only moving forward if they have one sort of large dedicated tenant signed, but there's nothing being built on spec at this point, I guess is not.
No, Portland is not that type of market at all. Things move fairly slowly here. Our absorption rate is fairly low. I mean, you see the only 2 multi-tenanted new construction projects we've seen are Widgery Wharf and 16 Middle Street, and those have been relatively slow when you compare it to larger cities like Boston, New York, to lease up. I mean, those projects are leased before they even break ground. So it's a tricky proposition for developers here in Portland. You do need to have, I think 16 Middle Street had 1 floor committed, Widgery Wharf same, top floor is committed before you build it. But in the overall scheme, the Class A market in downtown Portland's just over 2 million square feet. And so there's only been, 50,000 square feet of new construction built. So that's not having, obviously, we're still seeing a drop in the Class A vacancy rate. It's not having a huge impact on the market right now, and I don't think there's enough being built.
And we can't forget the other player in this is the lenders, obviously. I mean, the lenders, we went through this in the early 90s where lenders were holding a lot of properties, and they've learned their lesson, I think, and they're still staying the course with making sure that the developers, before they start funding that construction loan, want to see at least one major tenant, if not more, in any of these buildings. And there's a lot to be said for their role in all this.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about one of the sort of remaining or aftermath victims of the commercial real estate bust in just a little bit. So one of the things I wanted to ask you guys was how much space is going to be coming online that's going to be a multi-tenant space, available space, and how will that affect? Do you think the Class A market downtown? Is there any, are there any large footprint like spaces coming that are going to be available?
I think that's the problem. There aren't a ton of large footprint spaces right now, and I think when renewals are coming up, given the vacancy rates being so low, it's obviously creating prices to stay pretty high. And I think people are taking a hard look at suburban between parking costs and lease rates staying fairly aggressive. I think most companies are seeing what their options are outside, given there's quite a bit of vacancy in the suburban market, especially with the Union building coming on, which in and of itself is about 250,000 square feet. And above and beyond that, there's probably about another 250,000 square feet in the suburban market. So you can go lease space out there for significantly cheaper rates and free parking. So I think we may see some vacancies. I think the prices may be pushing some people off the peninsula.
Yeah, my concern's really for the suburban market. Maybe not this year, but certainly next year. I see 3 huge vacancies coming up. And last year there were several large deals. I think, thank God for the medical sector. You look at the 3 largest deals in the suburban market last year were all medical related, and I see that trend continuing for next year. But still, there's a lot of space, as Jen was saying, coming online for 2019.
What about what's going on with lease rates, and do you see, are they creeping up, and will any of this new construction have any impact on those? Sam, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, new lease rates, downtown we're seeing the high 20s, low 30s triple net. I think there may be some sort of a flight to quality, with some of these other tenants going into new buildings. But I don't know that I see that changing lease rates drastically downtown.
Have they moved much in the last couple of years? Have they gone up a lot?
I would say not significantly.
Yeah, I think if you look overall with Class A and Class B together, there hasn't been a whole lot of movement. As Jen was saying, the Class B market's fairly flat. You haven't seen a whole lot of change in that. Maybe if a Class B building is purchased and there's reinvestment into common areas, you'll see a slight increase. The Class A, there's been a slight uptick over the last 5 years, at least from what I've seen in my studies with my research with regards to maybe 1 or 2% increase per year for Class A. But as Jen was saying, there's still a big delta between existing Class A space and new construction, and those are 2 different tenants for sure.
We should keep in mind too, it only takes one large vacancy to really shift our market, whether it be downtown or suburban. So if there's a large tenant that moves out of downtown, much like Monument Square a few years ago, when that was trying to get filled up, that could drastically affect our market. We're just not that big where something large like that definitely puts a swing for us.
But Craig, I'll just add that, it not only just base rent lease cost, but also just from an occupancy cost with parking costs continuing to go up. You take a standard 3,000 square foot user, that's, what we would advise probably 15 people in that office. If they're paying, $150 a foot, which is probably, or $150 a space, for parking, that's an average. That's another $27,000 annually to their occupancy cost. And that alone, comes down to $9 a square foot, when you're only paying 12, 13, 14 triple net on a base rent, that certainly adds to your occupancy cost.
And that's if you can get it.
If you can get it. And that affects the smaller employers, I think, a lot more than larger employers. Larger employers, WEX, they may have dedicated parking and all that. That's great. But most of downtown is filled with smaller employers who have to subsidize their parking for their employees, if not pay at all. And so it adds, that money is big. And our increases in our own firm in the last 5 years the parking's outpaced all the other increase in expenses. And we do pay for our employees' parking. So something has to be done there. And this trend with the open space concept of all these offices just means that more employees per 1,000 square feet, too.
Absolutely.
So, it's a great trend. It's wonderful. And it's the new age kind of way of approaching work environment. But it just exacerbates the parking problem. And yes, that's a problem.
Well, and most of the garages are on a 1 to 3 year waiting list right now. So if you are lucky enough to be with a landlord that actually has parking that they can provide you, it's something you really got to educate your tenants about, because if you're going into a building that doesn't have parking allocated with it or at least available at market rates, it's a big issue. So
yeah. maybe the next trend in like hippie office could be everybody rides a bike to work.
Yeah.
February.
Barely live in Portland, Maine.
Unimportant.
Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to ask about, how much new space can the market absorb? And it sounds like that's not really all maybe that important of a question, because it doesn't sound like we have a whole lot of new undedicated space coming. But do you think the market could absorb another, couple of projects like what's being built, or are we kind of at a saturation point?
That's the question.
I mean, if I'm looking at our Class A market at less than 1%, then I certainly think that that's an indicator for new construction. But like I said earlier, it's tricky because you still, you have a 1-year absorption for some of these new office buildings. And for some projects, unless you can get over $30 a square foot, that doesn't help the numbers at all.
We're not seeing, we all do, a fair amount of business up here, and I don't think we're seeing a whole lot of new tenants come to the market. Out of the deals that I've done in the past 12 to 24 months, I've got 2 maybe that are new to, brand new to the market. So, we got to keep that in mind. So we're seeing some expansions of some tenants, which is great. For a long time, we didn't see that. So, but new tenants, not seeing a ton of them.
So it's just people moving from Class B to
Shifting.
Class A,
Yeah,
or suburban
exactly.
to urban? Yeah.
The new development out by the former Elks place, it's up next to the airport. They have 2 new buildings out there you've probably seen, both Clark Insurance, and there was a medical office building. Both of those tenants came from other places. They just moved to different spaces, larger spaces, but they moved. So that was not new tenants, not new people into the market.
I see.
Yeah.
So let's finally get to the big burning $64 million question. If everybody's moving from suburban to downtown, what's that going to do to traffic, and what's that going to do to parking?
I won't slide right out of
Anyone?
India Street like I used to anymore. It's an issue. I think a lot of us are already seeing it. Just working, most of our offices are downtown, so I think we're already seeing, it takes me 10 minutes just to get off Commercial Street to even get on the way to my appointment in South Portland. So it's interesting.
I took an urban planning course in college, and we had a week focused on traffic engineering, and I realized that I don't belong in that sector, so I'm not going to make any predictions. But I just this morning was counting the number of planned employees to be added to the India Street area. It's 2,500 employees over the next 3 years added to that area. And that's not including hotels, smaller residences. That's just office employees. So I think I've heard that, a couple of the larger tenants that are moving to that area are undergoing a traffic study right now to see what should be done, what can be done. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, what comes out of that study.
I think, unfortunately, we've come to the state that I don't go down near India or Commercial Street now anyway, but when these 2 projects go forward, forget it. I think we've gotten to the point where until there's a total standstill of traffic, that nothing's going to happen, which is unfortunate. I think we've missed the boat on sort of planning for this kind of thing ahead of time. There really has to be more public transportation. There has to be trolley system. I think that the Brighton and Forest Avenue, which is where thousands of people come in every morning, has to have some kind of trolley or shuttle system into the city so you can get all those cars off the road. The easy solution is to say, we'll build more parking, but that's, if you build it, they will come. And I'm not sure we want them to come. And so we've got to think about how to build parking off Peninsula and have people get into town other ways from those off-site parking spaces, lots or garages, whatever they might be. Because I just think the traffic situation is just unbearable. So in addition to the office workers and the employees of the hotels and all the new restaurants that are coming up, of course, we have a lot of tourists coming in now too. And a lot of them drive in. So, it's wonderful to be a hot city and the city a #1 list in a number of places. But this is the kind of result we're facing. So a lot has to be done fairly quickly, I think. Then we have the advent of driverless cars. What's that going to do to people?
I'm still waiting for flying cars.
Yeah, well, that's what it's going to take, I think.
But don't you think that this is usually a function of how the advancement of public transit options are sort of equivalent to how painful it is to get downtown, and maybe it just isn't painful enough yet.
I guess that's it. It's sort of a reactive thing, presumably. But the problem with that is anytime you have a municipal solution, state, federal, or local, it takes a lot of time. And so we're going to have to suffer for a while, I think, before people create a solution.
Yeah.
And Greg, I think everybody's aware of this issue at this point, and with regards to WEX, Charlie Craig in our office works with WEX and represents WEX, and as a part of their successful approval process, they did have to do a traffic study to what 450 people coming downtown to the industry neighborhood on a daily basis is going to do, and in peak hours. Between 7:30 and 8:30 in the morning, it's only adding about 168 trips during that peak hours, which for 450 people is relatively minor, and about 147 in the afternoon between 5 and 6. But over and above that, WEX has committed to a shuttle service from their South Portland campus where they'll be bringing people back and forth, and they're also working with local municipalities as a part of a park and ride shuttle service as well, utilizing local lots and such.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, I know this is an office talk, but I think one of the things we need to keep in mind too with regards to this is there's been a tremendous amount of hospitality and residential development on the peninsula as well. So when, 2 years ago when some of this stuff came on, they did the traffic studies and they're saying, oh yeah, this isn't going to be a huge impact. Well, now in that area you're adding Vets First Choice and you're adding WEX. So, those traffic impact studies are, kind of compiling over time. So, as much as I would love to say I'm going to ride my bike to work in February, it's not going to happen. I've got 2 kids to get to school, you know how it all goes. So I think ultimately, I was working with a company who I just leased 10,000 square feet to, and they wanted to be downtown because they had to attract the millennial crowd, and they're going to be competing with employees with WEX and Vets First Choice. So they said, don't worry, we don't need a ton of parking. We're going to have 100 people here. I need 30 spots. And so now they're coming to me and saying, oh God, Jen, I need a lot more parking than that. So we just are, we're just not like New York or Chicago and taking the subways to work. I mean, it's something that's, really creeping up on us. And like Drew said, I think, as time goes on, we're going to have to kind of live through this crunch here for a little while.
Yeah. Nate, what are your thoughts?
It would have been, hindsight's 2020, would have been great to plan for all this 3-4 years ago. But in defense of maybe city planners a little bit here, we're adding more Class A square footage in a 2 or 3 year span than we ever have before. And I haven't done the research, but I'm fairly confident we probably added more condos and residences in a 2 to 3 year area, at least in the last 100 years. So, I think this came as a little bit of a surprise in terms of how fast this is all happening. And while it would have been great to take a large view and say, wow, you know what, let's plan for 2,500 employees over the next 4 years. I don't think any of us would have expected that.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things is, if you would have crystal balled this thing 5 years ago even, you wouldn't have predicted this. So,
No.
I don't think there would have been support for any kind of major changes in public transit based on, the prospect of possible new traffic downtown. Well, we talked about traffic. What's the situation with parking? And I know there is a big parking garage that's being proposed on the one part of the shipyard property, and there's going to be parking associated with the WEX project. What's going on with parking, and are we going to have enough to accommodate this additional traffic? Anybody want to take that?
I think there'll be some short-term relief over the next year. Ed Gardner at 511 Congress is building a garage which will help. The garage that I think was just okayed at 104th Street will help as well. I was talking with Greg Bolus, who represented Vets First Choice in our office, and I think most of the parking that will be built on that site is just to accommodate that site. So it's not really going to help anything else. So I don't really see any long-term relief. Maybe in the next couple of years it might help a little bit. But, you look at the cost of parking is consistently increasing. I think I pay $180 a month for my space. Then, someone told me, a developer told me, I think you need to average $250 per parking space in order to afford construction of a new parking garage, and we're getting there. So, I think 4 years ago, it just wasn't economically feasible to build a parking garage, and I think we're finally getting to that point now where, you might see that happen in the next couple of years.
I think developers have to get more creative as well. I know the Verdante project, which is the new condo project up the hill from Luminato, construction hasn't started, but it's been approved. They're using a mechanical parking system there, which is very common in New York and in Europe and other places. And I've been told that it's a huge savings. They can fit 43 cars in space that would otherwise only handle 17 cars if it was an open air lot. So there are ways of handling the parking crunch. Again, the traffic is an issue, but for parking crunch, there are ways. They're a little more expensive, but with the prices these days, that those things, I think, are available to developers to help alleviate the parking situation for a project.
Is there going to be, any of these parking garage projects going to accommodate, not monthly, space renters, but just regular people, visiting downtown?
I think most of the new parking garages are just going to be built to accommodate, existing or, future projects. So I think we're going to be kind of, I think, holding steady where we are, even with the new parking that's being built, because Vet's first choice building is 170,000 square feet. So you need to have some access to some parking from there. Same with WEX. So I think we're going to just kind of be where we are.
Yeah.
I think you need the plan to have those extra parkers in order to afford new construction for a garage. I mean, in order to get that 250 per space number, you need to have the overnight parkers for residences who are only allowed to park there from 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. You need to have the monthly parkers, and you need to have the daily parkers.
That's how you get to that 250. Yep. Well, let's move on to medical office, because I think Jen, or maybe, Jen, you maybe mentioned that, somebody mentioned that medical office is kind of an important component of this market. So to what extent is medical driving new construction? I mean, how many of the projects that have been happening the last couple of years are related to the medical profession?
Well, obviously, the Main Med project is kind of a project in and of itself, but we do a fair amount of medical work for several different medical groups, and we've seen most of their expansion be in existing spaces. So, for example, we did a 25,000 square foot lease for Intermed out at 50 Foden Road into an existing building. They were able to secure a pretty good rental rate there and, have a prominent corner. So I still think there's enough inventory out there. Likely those guys aren't coming downtown, they're staying suburban because they need accessibility and parking. And I think there's enough inventory out there, good visible inventory, that they're likely going to probably absorb existing prior to building new construction. Main Med went into the old Kaplan University building across from Intermed, so we're seeing more of that versus new construction. And then Main Med obviously has secured 222 St. John Street. They're taking over that whole building and building a parking garage. So it's mostly been existing expansion for the lion's share of it. There is some new
Mercy, right?
Smaller
What's going on with them? I mean, they're building a new or moving into a new campus, right?
Yeah, so there is definitely some of that, but there's enough existing inventory where I think you're going to see that being absorbed first, because it's definitely more cost effective for them.
Is the trend for them to, open sort of smaller suburban type offices? Is that what they're doing? Or?
There's some, I think a lot of them are. So Intermed, for example, just opened they're using their Foden Road facility for urgent care and blood lab and that type of thing. I believe it's a quick care for Main Med across the way as well.
Adding a practice,
Imaging, those types of. So I think you're seeing some, kind of ancillary spaces where they're kind of maybe even combining a few smaller practices into a larger space, which is exactly what Intermed did out at 50 Foden Road. They took several smaller practices and put them into a larger, more efficient space for them.
Yeah, the One Riverfront Plaza deal in Westbrook, which when Jen talks about one deal making a huge impact on the market, that was probably 30% of the overall vacancy in suburban. But they combined several locations into one large location. And so I see maybe that more as the trend, and looking forward to a couple potential transactions for 2019. I think I see that happening as well.
And, yeah, the 222 St. John Street is more of that, where Main Med is coming out of a number of locations on the peninsula and consolidating into one location at 222. So to speak more of that as well.
And what about Mercy Hospital? I know they're going to be vacating their current campus over there on the hill. What's that going to do to the market? And I don't even know, like, what is that campus zoned for? What could be built there? Do you guys have any ideas about that?
I think the one thing that I've heard about that is they want to stay in there for the next 3 years. So I think that if we all had a crystal ball, it'd be fantastic. But I think that's to be seen where we are in 3 years type of deal. But likely a senior housing conversion or something.
Generally speaking, it'll be residential.
I think it'll be residential.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the time and temp building, since we've been sort of alluding to it. That's one of the most interesting pieces of commercial real estate in Portland. It's this iconic building that everybody remembers from growing up and visiting the arcade there and the theater, except for me because I'm from Phoenix. But and it also is sort of the poster child for what went wrong during the commercial real estate bust, because it was one of these commercial loans that had been sold off to investors. And so when I don't know what started, which came first, the lowering of its value, or the exodus of tenants or whatever, but it went into default. And the special servicer, which is like they're like the collections agency for commercial real estate investors, they took it over, and they just kind of sat on it for, I don't know, a few years. And now finally, just last week, they put it up for auction, and it sold to someone that you guys probably know who it is, but I don't know who it is yet. And so I guess my question is, what do you think that means for the time and temp building? Do you think this is a good sign that something positive may happen with that property? Who'd like to take that question?
I'll start. Time and temperature building is very important to me personally. I'm a historic preservationist, and it's a historic landmark in downtown Portland. I was also the leasing broker on that building for 8 years. I know every inch of that building, and it has so much potential. The old theater plasterwork is still under some of the drop ceilings in the back of the building, and the views from the top towers, I just think there's so much potential. So I'm really excited that finally something's happening. I think, speaking with the other panelists here, the buyers don't want to be identified, but it's an excellent conversion project. I think just in terms of the on-site parking garage, it's one of the only buildings in downtown Portland that you don't have to go outside between a 300-space parking garage and the tower. And so I just think that there's excellent potential with that building, and I'm really happy that someone's going to be putting some money into that building, turning it around.
Jen?
Nate and I talked a little bit about this before we sat up here. So I think it's going to be interesting. It's a beautiful building. I mean, there's views in that building from like the 5th floor up, and you're looking at Casco Bay, and you're looking, over into the, it's just gorgeous. It really, I think it's going to be exciting to see what happens there, and I think it will. That's a building everyone, it's an icon in our community, and I think it's time for someone with some new blood takes it on, and I think we'll see some interesting development there.
Yeah. Sam, what are your thoughts on time and temp?
Overall, I think it's great that it's moved into new ownership. As Jen and Nate alluded to, it did sit for a period of time when it was taken over by servicing, and as you alluded, a mass exodus of majority of tenants. I think when it sold, it was about 38%.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Full. So just to have something going on at all is great, and it's certainly an exciting piece of property in downtown.
Yeah. Do you guys think it's going to become, do you think the usage of that building is likely to change? Do you think it's likely to go, they're likely to add a residential component? True?
Well, Lou, I understand that a lot of the people looking at the building who are the bidders were thinking of a residential component to it, a mixed-use component, upper floors presumably residential. It'd be interesting to see if that happens and how that works, but I think that'd be pretty cool for downtown Portland, yeah. There's a 443 Congress right next door here, was fully tenanted with commercial spaces, tenants. The Blue Tarp Financial moved over to 2 Monument Square, I think, and those folks, the developers, converted the top 3 floors to residential, and it's worked out quite well for them. And so it would be a similar kind of thing. Yeah,
I mean, to just look on a number standpoint for the impact on the office market downtown, just to geek out on some data real quickly, the vacancy right now, which we're still counting as office space vacancy, I think accounts for 30% of the vacant space in downtown Portland right now. And I took that building, let's just make an assumption that it's all converted to something other than office, which I don't think may happen. But if you take that building out of our market, our Class B vacancy rate downtown goes from 11% to 8%. So it will have a huge impact on the Class B market. And as I mentioned last year at my Merita presentation, that nothing's going to happen in the Class B market until something happens with that building or the building next door as well.
And is that sort of the new normal for multi-tenant, is to have retail on the bottom, then some office, and then some residential on the top, or not necessarily?
I think that site's large enough where it's got to be sort of more of a mixed-use project. And I think to develop it solely as office or solely as residential, that's a big absorption for this market to take. So likely to see sort of a mixed-use development go on there.
Yeah. And do you think it's likely that the existing tenants will have to vacate? Will they have to sort of do a ground up, renovation of that building, or?
It needs some work, so it needs some work. So I mean, there's a few ways that we had a couple people looking at it, and some people were like, we're just going to kind of put the Band-Aid on and keep people in there until we figure out what we're going to do and try to fill it, and others we're going to gut it to the studs and start from scratch essentially. So
it's a $6 million Band-Aid.
Yeah, it's exactly. Yeah.
That's a big Band-Aid.
So so I mean, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Drew, you have any thoughts on time and temp?
Other than I just said, I think mixed use would be a great idea for Portland. I think the more residents in Portland, the better and more lively the city becomes. I mean, it's already happening, but I don't think having more of that kind of mixed use stuff in town is a good idea for the city. As someone who lives in the city, I think it's great.
Yeah.
The city, but specifically the buildings, if you have a mixed use, say 120,000 square foot office building that has a coffee shop on the first floor and 6 floors of office above it, well, you automatically have people that are going to be buying coffee every day. So
yeah, I got kind of a dumb question. I was wondering if when that building is restored, if it will join the ranks of Class A space, or is it always going to be relegated to Class B? And what defines Class A versus Class B in a situation like that?
That is
we were just talking about that this morning.
Who owns the building?
We tread lightly on that.
I think each firm also maybe classifies it a little bit differently.
Yeah,
but,
that's very true.
I think for an historic building to become Class A, it needs to be completely gutted, every inch of it, and rebuilt. I think maybe one of the only historic buildings in downtown that we classify as Class A would be 254 Commercial Street, which is the Pierce Atwood building. And that was the Pierce Atwood building, 254 Commercial Street. And that was a complete gut job and rebuild historic tax credit project. So maybe, but they would have to do a number on that building to get any Class A designation, at least I think from our definition.
Yeah, I would agree with Nate.
Yeah. So let's just imagine for a moment that the Time and Temp building, the new owner does a beautiful, wonderful job on it, and and more of these Class B and suburban tenants flock to it and fill it up real quick. That, since we're talking about a market where we're not seeing a lot of new tenants coming in, what is that going to do to the suburban office market? Are they going to die of cannibalism out there?
real quick is a real relative term in our business. There's not much that happens very quickly. And I think we're a market that, generally speaking, doesn't have a high rate of absorption each year either. So, that will be a lot of space to absorb. Over 600,000 square feet in the suburban market that's available right now, including the unit building, is a lot of space for us to absorb. And it could be a game changer given the parking crunch we have downtown on moving some people out of downtown. So that's a loaded question, I guess.
In general saying we don't get a lot of new out-of-state tenants into Greater Portland, but those that do tend to more settle in the suburban market. Just the downtown scares out-of-state, maybe Fortune 500 companies in terms of parking and recruiting and access.
Any other thoughts on time and temp for the suburban market before we move on? I'd like to open up the floor to some questions. If anybody would like to ask a question. There's a microphone right there. If you wouldn't mind, if you'd like to just go up there and ask away.
Hey, I'm Darren, Lux Realty. One of the things my firm does is run the public market around a block from here. Just regarding parking, there was a study done in September of 2017 that was commissioned by the city of Portland by a Boston-based firm. A lot of people are not aware of it, but it was actually a pretty insightful report. And I think among the conclusions, which were very unpopular, which was to effectively decrease the demand for parking for a 10-year horizon by doing things that Drew was starting to mention there, like ride shares and public transits and demand zones where you're not allowed to park during rush hour, things like that, particularly in the peak parking areas in downtown. Those are behavioral change items that I think we're extremely reticent to consider. But I guess my question is, has anybody seen the city take action on the recommendations of that report?
Anyone?
I guess I have
Go ahead,
not.
Drew.
No, I have not. I haven't. But
I have
and
not
again, I heard what Nate said, and oh, sure, good.
Hi, Amy Barron, Downtown Experience Leader, Portland Downtown. Portland Downtown partnered on that study.
Okay.
We're a financial partner. One action directly, responding to the behavioral change is that one action that the city of Portland and Portland Downtown and other transportation partners are working on is a multimodal campaign to just make people more aware of some of the other options to driving some of these solid downtown. And that is in the process of being finalized right now, and hopefully be ready to come out winter, early spring.
We as an employer, would welcome anything like that. We encourage our employees. We have an employee who lives in Biddeford, takes the Zoom bus, and so we cover the cost of the Zoom bus. And if I had employees who were willing to park outside the peninsula and take a shuttle in, and I didn't have to subsidize $130 a month, I'd be happy to share the benefit of that with them. Healthcare, in your healthcare providers, we pay people to not opt into our healthcare, policy, and so people get subsidized to not be on healthcare. It's so expensive for an employer. I think employers could do the same thing with parking. To the extent that alternative parking is available, share the savings with an employee. If you're saving $70 a month in parking, give the employee a subsidy for some of that. Pay them to park out there. I think that would work, and that would help.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I wonder if anybody's doing that.
I do have a client who just recently unexpectedly lost half of their parking in downtown Portland. And they took that route and offered some sort of compensation for not using one of their limited parking spaces. And I think it's worked out pretty well. I think there was a little bit of hesitancy, but so there is some, and I can't remember exactly what the compensation is, but it's definitely helped the situation for sure.
Sir, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Paul Lusty, and this is more of a comment, observation. One part of the parking market that you haven't touched on, or I should say Jen and Craig has just touched on the edge of it, is the islands. Because many of these hotels and whatnot are built on top of the parking that originally was for the islands. And I can tell you, as somebody who has a wife that owns island property, and I work as a captain for a Sea Tow water taxi, that we ferry a tremendous number of contractors, especially this time of year, out to the islands for building, expanding, etc., for out on the islands. And parking is a complete scramble for these people. The garage built in the 80s originally for Casco Bay Lines has been oversold for decades now. And this is an ongoing, just yet another tentacle of the whole situation.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't considered asking you guys about the islands. Is there much new construction or leasing activity going on out?
Unified parking at exorbitant rates in comparison to what we used to make.
Yeah, I'm an islander, spend summers on Little Diamond Island, and I can tell you I felt that pinch, and I know a lot of my neighbors have as well. The city, I think, hears the islanders, at least from my perspective, and they do a good job making themselves heard. And I do believe that it is part of the city's parking plan is to provide parking for islanders. I don't know where that's going to be, but this summer, especially just with the increase in popularity on peaks, it's become a really big issue, especially for those folks that are living out there year-round. I think there's some discussion about it, but I don't know where it's going.
Who else would like to ask a question? Go ahead.
Hi, Lisa Whited, Workplace Transformation Facilitation, and I also am a volunteer on the City Planning Board. The two larger projects that have come before us more recently, WEX and Vets First Choice, both came with pretty robust efforts for engaging employees in adopting different practices. And that's really what we're talking about, is adopting behavior change. It certainly can be done. It's been done very well in larger cities, and I know we can do it. I just want to share personally, my family recently gave up a car, went down to one car to reduce our carbon footprint. My marriage has improved because my husband and I are spending more time together coming in and out of the city. So there are things that we can do to make this city the vibrant place that we want to live in and manage the growth. We need this growth. We desperately need new people, new businesses to come in. And we have to adopt these changes in order to create the city, the state that we all really want to live in.
I mean, I was talking with one of the employers that's moving to the India Street area, and they tend to attract a millennial crowd that is open to those changes a lot more than, say, maybe 50 and over. So maybe there's some hope with the younger generation. I don't think maybe the three of us can speak to that because we're in and out of our cars 5 or 6 times a day. So exactly. We're not good examples of ride sharing, but.
Do you think that the if the housing situation downtown could be the affordability problem could be alleviated somewhat, that would help with the traffic issues? That I guess my logic there is that the more people workers were able to afford to live there, they could walk to work. But that's a big what if.
I was going to say, that's a big
Who else would like to ask a question? Anyone? All right, well, I'll go to another question that I didn't put on the list, sorry guys, but I was curious about it. I was wondering about that Portland Foreside project. We wrote a lot about that a couple years ago, and we haven't really had much to say about it lately. Does anybody know what's going on with that project? Where that is in the process?
You're referring to 58 4th Street, the old Sprague?
Actually, I was, the Portland Company?
Yeah, Portland Company, yeah. Well, I mean, the Prentice Group owns that now, and they know they have plans, and they've been working through the city planning department to get the plans approved. I think their most recent attention's been to the marina. They have got a grant to do the marina over, and in a big way. It's going to be, they're going to have a breakwater built out there so that the less rough. The problem with that marina had always been it was very rough, and so it wasn't good for big boats. But they're making a lot of substantial improvements to it to create a first-class, world-class marina. And so that's the first big step. And then they're planning on obviously doing, a mixed-use hotel, restaurants, retail, residences, condos, all that going on down there at some point. And they do include a parking garage as part of their plan. But I think the marina is the first thing we're all going to see down there as a significant improvement.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I know that they are in lease negotiations with a sizable office tenant as well.
And that's, I would imagine that's sort of a prerequisite for moving forward, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it gets back to Drew's point about financing. They need kind of that anchor tenant to move forward on a lot of aspects.
One thing to keep in mind about this project is that it's huge. They are basically building a little city down there. So when you talk about, you look at the Vets First Choice or WEX building, you're financing a single building, a single project. This is multiple phases, multiple projects, multiple sources of financing. So, when you think about building a little city down there, you're talking about infrastructure. You've got to run all these utilities. You have to build roads and sidewalks, through this development. So it's just a huge project, and I think most Portlanders are used to things getting approved and then getting built just because they're single, occupancy projects, kind of like a WEX building. But I think there are good things happening down there, especially with the marina. I'm seeing that firsthand, keeping my boat there. But also, negotiations with a larger office tenant, which will have a huge impact and I think really kickstart, that western side of that development, which will be great.
And are they at the point now where they've got all of the clearances, the permissions that they need to build what they want to build, or are there still the possibility of roadblocks coming up for them in the future?
I'm not a master in planning. I mean, they got their well, of course, our planning director just left, but I forget master plan approval. So they have the overall plan approval, but I believe that they need to go for individual approvals for each new building that they build, as well as it is a historic district, so with regards to any renovations to the historic properties, there'll be some oversight there as well.
No, I was just saying the same thing. Yeah, they'll have to go back if it's master planned and kind of do individual buildings as they go. But I couldn't agree more with Nate in that, it's a city in and of itself. So, but it's exciting to see for so long, the development in downtown kind of stopped at Franklin Arterial, and that we have blown past that. And it's exciting to see, all the development happening and kind of sprawling out. So. Yeah.
Well, maybe we could just kind of go down the line, and you guys could give. Oh, well, before that, sir, go right ahead. Yeah, we welcome all questions.
So we've forgotten about the other side of the peninsula, which we always do, the Bay side. So I wonder if you could talk about the Federated project or anything else that's happening on that part that doesn't get talked about much.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Federated has been, in the news, so it's not listed right now. It's still out there, I know, but we will. I think that's probably a project that likely will be hopefully in play here sometime soon.
You're talking about Midtown?
Yes, the Midtown.
So that's not dead?
Well, no, the previous.
Oh, it is dead, but
yeah.
You're talking about a resurrection.
Yes, so it would be exciting to see. Obviously, there's a lot going on down there right now. So
East Bay side has kind of turned into its own, and everyone's really seen that happen. But West Bay side, a project that I was really happy to work on with the city was selling the public works buildings. We've closed 3 of those 6, the 4th next week. We've already seen, Barrett Maid has renovated their building. Jack Soley is building a condominium project. I'm a huge fan of that neighborhood. I think in 5 years it's going to be just a really, really cool place. 82 Hanover, the old general store building, closed last month. They're already doing leasing there. They have one great tenant going in. Bayside Bowl expanded. Just a lot of really great projects, a Century Tire project. I see just some really old, dilapidated buildings that are going to be getting reused and breathing new life into that neighborhood. So I'm really excited. I'm a big proponent of that neighborhood.
And it's becoming sort of a medical mecca as well, with Intermed being down there, and Main Eye, and Portland Gastro. So, and keep our eyes open for any medical users expanding in that area too.
We have Apothecary by Design. Are they down there as well?
Yeah.
And the Schlabach Foss building's converted to residential.
Oh, yeah.
And although they're with the Century Tire project and others, and there's one of the projects for the city is maybe an elderly housing development that's going to go in there with a commercial space on the first floor. But they're already scrambling for parking down there. And I know even tenants at Century Tire are renting spaces from other parties down in Bayside who have open lots right now until they get developed. So that's something that has to be paid attention to, too.
What's happening in the other side of Bayside where you have, hasn't there been some changes over there with some retail type businesses going into what used to be mostly an industrial area.
Young's Furniture in that area.
Yeah.
Mark Malone from our office worked with Young's and put them in there, and
Breweries.
Breweries, right.
breweries, Coffee by Design. So there's definitely been some growth in that area too.
Hard area to get into. You know, we probably all have clients who say, oh, I want to be in East Bayside, and just like, okay, well, there's nothing available. And I remember doing deals there just 5 or 6 years ago with people who wanted some sort of retail aspect, but the zoning didn't allow it. So everyone had to go back and get a change of use, and I don't know if there were variances or what, but it was just this huge 4-month process in order to get these tenants in there, and that seems to have changed. But I definitely remember that happening. Yeah, it was just, maybe 5 years ago, so it's come a long ways.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of changes, huh?
There's been a lot of changes.
So that was oh, sir, go right ahead.
Speaking of Bayside and also Commercial Street, is anybody paying attention to climate change and sea level rise?
Yeah, are all our waterfront properties going to end up underwater?
I've been to a few talks. It's certainly a concern that I don't know what's being done, but I believe the city right now is undergoing a study for marginal way, and they're tackling the problem areas. The problem area being right now over by Whole Foods, but I think the whole area, especially Bayside, when you look at maybe in the next 50, 60 years, some studies say.
Parking in the Whole Foods parking lot's kind of like playing Russian roulette these days.
Yeah, well, they're also building up and I mean, they're also, I think with the Midtown project, part of that redevelopment was actually raising the street 2 or 3 feet.
Yeah.
So, they are paying some attention to it.
Sir, go ahead.
Yeah, I was getting back to 58 4th Street. One of the things, you look at what demand is these days for office buildings. You've got Wex and That's First Choice, which are modern, classy buildings. And I sort of wonder about the future of 58 4th Street with all the landmark buildings, and are we going to find uses for those buildings if there's demand for it, given the development purpose you have for that architecture? Any thoughts?
Being on the board of Greater Portland Landmarks, I've had a lot of experience with that project over the years. Those buildings actually, unlike maybe some other residential buildings, which are small floor plates and a lot of columns. The buildings that will be kept, which I think were 7 of the 11, are large floor plates. They're only 2 or 3 story buildings, and so I think the developers are thinking certainly retail on the first floor, and then maybe even event space on a lot of the second floor office spaces, the second floor spaces. So when you look at across all those 7 historic buildings, I'm thinking maybe there's only 50 or 60,000 square feet of historic space. Probably not even that much, actually. I'm overestimating on that. So, and I think the space that would be available for office redevelopment is certainly usable space.
It does add to cost, and so there's other options. So that's something that will definitely play a factor.
Yeah, I mean, those buildings screen for windows.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to put windows in?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can. Yeah.
Certainly.
What about? I mean, don't those buildings have like really small footprints? And by footprint, I mean the amount of square feet on each floor. And isn't that kind of like not very desirable?
I had an office tenant looking at a historic building in that development, and they were able to put together 18,000 square feet on one floor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Large floor plate.
Yeah, because I remember the old Press Herald building, you had to run up and down the stairs constantly because I never actually worked in that building, but I did tour it. I heard that you had to walk up and down the stairs a lot.
Yeah, I mean, these were industrial buildings. They were making steam engines, so they have much larger floor plates than, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, speaking of industrial stuff turning into other stuff, what about Thompson's Point? We haven't talked about that project. What's the status of that, and how are things going out there? Anybody know about that project?
Well, the Children's Museum of Maine is building a building out there. You can see that as you go down the highway. They've built up the ground there, and so that's unusual for them, where they're having actually new building built. But that will help. I don't know much about the existing buildings now.
There's office development that's out there. I know Drew from your office is handling that. So there's I think 25 or 30,000 square feet, or maybe upwards of even 50,000 square feet of office that can be built up there.
And aren't they going to build a hotel and residential and a bunch of stuff?
Yeah, there's been a lot of speculation on what's going on out there.
I mean, the Children's Museum closed on their land to build, and I think what they've done with the historic buildings on the sites just really cool with Bissell Brothers and the winery and the event space. It's just really, really awesome. But that was kind of more of a, build it as the tenants came type thing. I don't think that was part of the original plan, was to keep those buildings. And so I think they met the demand that was out there, and there was demand for those types of spaces. But with the Children's Museum, there is plan for, 4-story, I think it's 30,000 square foot office building. But once again, you need a tenant in order to build it, so.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to quickly go down the line and ask each of you to give us your sort of your vision of, in 5 years from now, what will have changed the most about the Portland office market from today? What will things look like, and what will be different? Drew, what do you think?
Well, from the office market, I think it's just going to be, obviously all the construction that we have going on, they'll be filled up. I don't know if there'll be any more at that point. I don't see that right now, but then again, it's better, these guys are better suited to talk about that. And that's really all I have. I just, obviously we're all concerned about parking to a certain degree, but traffic is the big thing, I think. I mean, everyone, it's a sort of a mindset thing, people my age, driving was a privilege, this is just, everyone expected to be able to drive their own car. Everyone has one car. But it's nearly not. You've got to, I think eventually we're going to have to pay dearly for that, either by reducing the number of cars we have, or it'd be more expensive to have a car drive downtown. Bigger cities are already changing their toll systems. London has had this for years and has worked quite well to reduce the traffic situation downtown London. Now I don't think we'll ever get to that point, hopefully, but that's the kind of concept, is to make it, it's not a privilege to drive your car to work downtown Portland. It's a right, and you may have to pay for that right in the future, one way or another. And I think we just have to think about that.
Yeah, Sam.
I think in the next 5 years we'll see 1 or 2 more new office buildings, spurred by big companies in the area that are trying to continue to attract top talent here to Maine. I also think that you'll see Libbytown and West Bayside developed more, and as everybody's alluded to today, hopefully a behavioral change in the thoughts of coming downtown and parking downtown. And
Jen, how about you? What's going to change?
I said this 2 years ago, but at some point this cycle is going to come to an end. So I think right now things are good. I think things are very strong, and I think that $9 that parking is adding a square foot, give or take, people are able to absorb. I think at some point in the next 5 years, people are going to be taking a harder look at that, and I think you're probably going to see some larger companies who necessarily don't need to be downtown moving to the suburban market to lessen their overhead, and I think we're going to possibly see some vacancies. And again, I can't say it enough, there's one large vacancy in our market can create a large swing in vacancy rates and pricing and all of that. So probably somewhere in that 5-year cycle we'll likely see something like that.
Yeah. Drew, Nate?
Yeah, 5 years. Floating cars, or flying cars and floating buildings, right?
They're always going to be 5 years away.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a Portland kid, born and raised in downtown Portland. I love where this city is going. It's amazing to think where this city was 30 years ago. I think obviously some careful planning, as Drew mentioned, with regards to parking and traffic. But where I see the city going, as long as the Class A vacancy rate stays below 3.5%, it's proven in the last 30 years that there'll be new construction. So I think at least for the next year or two, we'll see maybe a couple new projects, as Sam was saying, but also expansion into other areas. I wrote an article maybe a year ago about, what potential neighborhoods is the future. And I think Forest Avenue corridor to Woodford corner is really an interesting study to see what can be done there with residential, getting more density, and even maybe shuttling parkers in and getting more retail. I just see Forest Avenue as an excellent opportunity maybe 5-10 years down the road.
Well, please, everyone, give our panelists a big thank you. Thanks a lot, guys. And thanks to all of you for coming. We really appreciate it.